In March 2024, something happened that received almost no coverage in American media. China and Brazil signed an agreement to conduct all future trade in their own currencies. No dollars, no American banks. Within weeks, Russia, Iran, and Saudi Arabia followed suit. By year's end, over $18 trillion worth of global trade had quietly slipped away from the dollar system. The weapon isn't military, it's financial, and it's already been deployed. Most Americans have no idea this is happening. They see China as a distant competitor, not an existential threat to their currency. That's exactly what makes this so dangerous. This isn't war that gets announced. This is the slow, methodical dismantling of American financial power. And by 2026, it may be too late to stop. To understand what's happening, you have to understand what the dollar really is. It's not currency, it's control. For over 80 years, the world has been forced to use dollars for international trade. Want oil? Need dollars. Want business? Need dollars. Want reserves? Need dollars. This system has given America a superpower no empire in history has possessed. The ability to print money that the entire world is forced to accept. But every empire eventually faces the same choice: use that power wisely, or abuse it until it breaks. America chose abuse. Since 2008, the Federal Reserve has printed over 18 trillion new dollars. They've flooded the global economy with American currency to bail out banks, fund wars, and finance spending. The rest of the world was forced to absorb this inflation. Their savings diluted, their currencies weakened. Their economies destabilized by American monetary policy they had no vote controlling. China watched. China learned. China started planning. The first sign appeared in 2013, when China launched the Belt and Road Initiative. On the surface, it looked like infrastructure: roads, railways, ports across Asia, Africa, and Europe. But infrastructure was never the goal. The real goal was creating an alternative economic network that didn't need American dollars or banks. A network that could function completely outside American control. By 2020, China had signed currency swap agreements with over 40 countries. These agreements allowed direct trade without converting through dollars. No American intermediaries, no Federal Reserve monitoring. The foundation for a post-dollar world was being laid, while America was distracted by politics. Then came 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine. America responded with severe financial sanctions. Russian assets frozen. Russian banks cut off from SWIFT. Russian currency reserves seized. The message was clear: cross America and we destroy your economy. But sanctions are double-edged. They only work if the target has no alternative. Russia had been preparing. Within weeks, Russia was conducting energy trade with China and India in rubles and yuan. No dollars required. What should have crippled Russia instead became proof of concept for dollar alternatives. China saw the demonstration. So did every nation with complicated relationships with America. If America could weaponize the dollar against Russia today, they could weaponize it against anyone tomorrow. The incentive to find alternatives shifted from economic to survival. The acceleration began immediately. In 2023, China's yuan became the second most used currency in international trade finance, surpassing the euro. Saudi Arabia started accepting yuan for oil. The UAE launched a yuan clearinghouse. Brazil and Argentina agreed to create a common currency. Each move might seem small in isolation, but they represent systematic deconstruction of dollar dominance. Every trade that doesn't use dollars is trade that doesn't support American power. Every central bank that reduces dollar reserves is preparing for a post-American world. Here's what makes this dangerous for America. The dollar system isn't just important to the U.S. economy, it is the economy. America imports far more than it exports. The 2023 trade deficit exceeded $900 billion. In any normal country, this would be catastrophic. But America runs these deficits because the world needs dollars. Foreign countries accept American currency for real goods because they need those dollars for trade. If the world stops needing dollars, America can no longer afford its lifestyle. The government can no longer fund itself through currency printing without immediate inflation. The military can no longer be sustained. Social programs can no longer be maintained. American prosperity depends entirely on the world accepting American money for American promises. China understands this dependency better than most Americans. They've studied every previous reserve currency collapse. The British pound dominated global trade for over a century before losing status in 2 decades. The pound's fall wasn't military, it was financial. Britain could no longer convince the world to hold their currency. Trade shifted to dollars. British power collapsed. The pattern is always the same. The reserve currency country becomes addicted to currency dominance privileges. They print more money than their economy justifies. They run larger deficits than productivity supports. Eventually, the world realizes the currency is overvalued and the empire overleveraged. The transition away accelerates rapidly. That acceleration is happening now. Central banks worldwide reduced their dollar reserves by over $200 billion in 2023. This was the largest decline since records began. Meanwhile, gold purchases by central banks reached record highs. Countries are preparing for a world where dollars are no longer the only safe asset. China's $18 trillion weapon isn't a single transaction. It's the aggregate value of global trade that has moved away from dollars since 2020. Every oil contract priced in yuan, every commodity deal settled in euros, every trade agreement bypassing the dollar system. Each reduction in dollar demand reduces American power. The mathematics are becoming unavoidable. If just 10% of global trade shifts away from dollars, demand for U.S. currency falls dramatically. The Federal Reserve faces a choice. Allow the dollar to weaken substantially, making imports expensive and reducing living standards. Or raise interest rates high enough to attract foreign capital, likely triggering severe recession. Neither preserves American dominance. If 25% of global trade moves away from dollars, the scenario becomes much worse. The government would struggle to finance debt at reasonable rates. The military budget would require cuts. Social programs would need reduction. The economic foundation of American global power would crumble. If 50% of global trade abandons dollars, America faces a currency crisis similar to Britain after World War II. Rapid inflation, economic contraction, and the end of superpower status. Not because America was conquered, but because America could no longer convince the world to finance American ambitions. China doesn't need 50% immediately. The beauty of this strategy is that it feeds on itself. As more countries move away from dollars, remaining countries have more incentive to follow. No one wants to be the last holder of a declining currency. The process accelerates. The timeline should concern every American. Currency transitions happen faster than most realize. The pound's dominance lasted from 1850 to 1950. But the actual transition, when the dollar replaced the pound, was only 15 years, from 1939 to 1954. Most change happened in just 5 years during and after World War II. Digital technology makes modern currency transitions even faster. In 1945, changing global payment systems required rebuilding physical infrastructure. Today, it requires updating software. Countries can shift trade patterns and reserve holdings in months rather than decades. China has been building dollar replacement infrastructure for over a decade. The digital yuan is already being tested internationally. The cross-border interbank payment system provides an alternative to SWIFT. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank offers an alternative to World Bank financing. All the pieces are in place. That tipping point may be closer than most realize. In January 2024, China surpassed America as the world's largest trading partner for over 120 countries. These countries now depend more on Chinese markets than American markets. Their incentive to use Chinese currency instead of American currency grows stronger every year. The geopolitical situation makes the transition more likely. America's relationships with traditional allies have become more complicated. The sanctions against Russia demonstrated that dollar dominance can be weaponized. The conflicts in the Middle East have strained relationships with oil-producing countries. The trade tensions with China have convinced Beijing that economic decoupling is inevitable. Every major power is now planning for a multipolar financial world. They're not planning for it as a distant possibility. They're planning for it as an immediate necessity. The infrastructure is being built. The agreements are being signed. The reserves are being diversified. American policymakers seem largely unaware of how advanced this process has become. They continue to behave as if dollar dominance is permanent. They continue to use financial sanctions as a primary tool of foreign policy. They continue to run fiscal and trade deficits that would be impossible without currency privilege. They continue to print money as if global demand for dollars will last forever. This isn't necessarily malicious. It's human nature. People who have always held power struggle to recognize when that power is slipping away. The British Empire made the same mistake. They continued to act like a global superpower long after their economic foundation had eroded. They maintained expensive military commitments they could no longer afford. They assumed their currency would remain dominant because it had always been dominant. The end came suddenly. In 1956, Britain tried to assert its traditional influence during the Suez Crisis. America threatened to dump British pounds and crash the British economy. Britain surrendered immediately. The empire that had ruled a quarter of the world discovered it was now dependent on American approval for basic economic survival. America may face its own Suez moment sooner than expected. It could come as a debt crisis where foreign creditors demand higher interest rates. It could come as a trade crisis where major partners refuse to accept dollars. It could come as a geopolitical crisis where America tries to use financial weapons and discovers they no longer work. When that moment arrives, the transition will accelerate rapidly. Countries that were gradually reducing their dollar exposure will rush to eliminate it entirely. Markets that were slowly shifting away from dollars will abandon them quickly. The mathematical weight of $18 trillion in redirected trade will become impossible to ignore. The year 2026 isn't chosen arbitrarily. It represents the mathematical point where current trends in global trade, currency reserves, and geopolitical alignment reach critical mass. The point where dollar demand falls below dollar supply on a scale that cannot be managed through normal policy tools. China's weapon isn't dramatic, it's systematic. It doesn't destroy America in a single attack. It removes the economic foundation that American power depends on. Slowly, quietly, and inevitably. The real danger isn't that Americans will see this coming too late. The real danger is that they won't see it coming at all. Because the most successful attacks are the ones that look like nothing is happening until everything has changed. China isn't trying to defeat America militarily. They're trying to make American military power irrelevant by removing its economic foundation. They're not trying to destroy the dollar overnight. They're trying to build a world where the dollar is no longer necessary. That world is being constructed right now. Every trade deal, every currency agreement, every infrastructure project, every digital payment system. The foundation for post-dollar global commerce is being laid, while America debates domestic politics. By the time this becomes obvious to American leaders, the mathematical momentum may be impossible to reverse. By the time it becomes obvious to American citizens, their economic options may already be determined by forces beyond American control. The $18 trillion weapon is already deployed. The question isn't whether it will work. The question is whether anyone will notice before it's too late.